2 decades. Dr. Seeley earned his PhD in Hebrew Bible and Ancient Near Eastern Studies at the University of Michigan. He has spent a great deal of time studying the Jerusalem Temple, and he also has a great interest in Josephus. So we're privileged to have him combine those two interests today. He'll be speaking to us on Josephus and Temple. Dr. Seeley.
I was a little nervous about this, and I told my colleague Bill Hamblin, I said, but it's only 20 minutes. Bill Hamblin said, a lot of bad things can happen in 20 minutes. So let's enjoy the next 20 minutes. I'm here to speak to you about a man named Josephus. Josephus is a name that's really familiar to members of the church. And he has a whole amount of authority. In fact, we have a game we play in our family, and the game is this. When you're sitting in a Sunday school class and you're very, very bored, raise your hand and say, Josephus said. Then you can say almost anything you want, and people will sort of almost believe you. Josephus wrote 4 works. He wrote a work called Jewish War. He wrote a work called Antiquities. He wrote a work defending Judaism called Against Appian, and he wrote his autobiography. So we know a lot about this person, and we know a lot about the world that he lived in from his point of view. In fact, one of the great strengths of Josephus is he's prolific. One of the great weaknesses of studying Josephus is a lot of the people that lived around him at the time hasn't been preserved, their words. So the study of Josephus is really important. Today I want to talk about the tabernacle as cosmos and Josephus' Antiquities. Originally I picked the topic Josephus in the temple, which of course is way too vast. Okay? So I picked what I think is the most interesting idea that Josephus gives us in his writings, the tabernacle as cosmos. Later it'll be the temple of cosmos. He has various descriptions of the temple and the tabernacle in his work, but we're going to concentrate on Antiquities. Now, the Book of Antiquities is a retelling of the Bible from Adam and Eve all the way up into just the period before the Jewish War in the lifetime of Josephus. It consists of 20 volumes, so it's a very, very long work. And Josephus, at the very beginning, he tells us this. This narrative will, therefore, in due course, set forth the precise details of what is in the Scriptures according to its proper order. For I promised that I would do this throughout this treatise, neither adding nor omitting anything. Now, Josephus does anything but that. In fact, if he had recounted to us the entire Hebrew Bible in 20 books, none of us would ever have any interest in reading it all, right? Because judging from gospel doctrine class, nobody reads the Old Testament in the Bible anyway. The Book of Antiquities is interesting to us because, in fact, he doesn't do exactly this in terms of adding or omitting. He adds lots of things and he omits lots of things. And one of the interesting things about study of Josephus is to evaluate what he's telling us by a very simple criterion. What has he deleted in this story? I'm going to read you a list. This is the list of the big episodes he's deleted, not just the smaller details. Jacob's deception of his father Isaac, Tamar Judah episode, Moses killing the Egyptian, the golden calf episode. You can imagine here he's making Old Testament to be read at family home evening. And I'll never forget the family home evening in which we read the Judah Tamar story with 2 children in the room under the age of 10. And then we looked at each other and we thought, now, what were we thinking? Reading the Old Testament. So we did Leviticus the next week. The golden calf episode, the story of the brazen serpent, the story of Gideon smashing the Baal altar, and Elisha's cursing of the little boys. Now, some of those stories, you can instantly tell why these wouldn't be a great story. But some of these stories are interesting. For example, we have a sense, because Josephus tells us this, that his audience is a Hellenistic Roman audience that might not have responded so well to the idea of breaking idols, for example. So we can see those stories out. Josephus leaves out the custom of circumcision, which might not have resonated so well with some of his audience. So we can tell lots of things by what he left out. He also added some things. The most spectacular thing that he added was a very long narrative about Moses' campaign as a military leader in Egypt against the Ethiopians, where he met and he married what was to be his wife, the Ethiopian princess, which is referred to in the Miriam and Aaron story as his Cushite wife. All right, so we have a huge episode there that we know nothing about from the Bible. He has made additions to the stories of Cain and Abel, Jacob, Joseph, Samson, and many others. There's lots of additions. Today we've chosen to talk about the addition he's made to the text of the description of the tabernacle as the cosmos. Okay, so we want to explore this idea as presented to us by Josephus. If someone should investigate the construction of the tent and should observe the clothing and the vestals of the priest that we use for the sacred service, he would find that our lawgiver, and he means Moses here, was a man of God, and that the slanders that we hear from others are unfounded. For he will find that each of these is a indication and representation of the universe, if someone should be willing to consider them ungrudgingly and with understanding. That's a great idea. And I find that we Latter-day Saints love the idea of temple as cosmos. We love the idea, and I'm going to give you a little note here. Josephus often refers to the tabernacle as the temple. And in fact, in other passages, he refers to the temple as cosmos as well. This is a quote from Josephus, he built the tabernacle, and it differed not at all from a portable and wandering temple. So in our discussion today, the temple or the tabernacle as cosmos are synonymous. There's probably some differences we could make, but for us, they're synonymous. It's an idea that resonates with Latter-day Saints, and I've always tried to analyze this. Like, if you ever want an audience of Latter-day Saints, what do? Put in the headline, Temple and Cosmos, right? Everybody will come. I think it's because we actually do believe what happens at the temple has cosmic import. And we believe that temples are connected with the heavens, the earth, with the living and the dead. So this is a really, really important idea for Latter-day Saints, and one that we value highly. And then we're just going to read a couple of passages from Josephus that shows exactly what his definition of this is. And I've divided these out sort of by categories. The tabernacle is sacred space. It happened that such an arrangement of the tent was also an imitation of the nature of the universe. By dividing the tent, which is 30 cubits long, into 3 parts, and designating 2 of them for all the priests as a place accessible and in common, he signifies the earth and sea, for these also are accessible to all. But he earmarked the 3rd part for God alone because of the fact that the heaven also is inaccessible to men. So here we have the sacred space of the tabernacle is in fact a mirror of the cosmos. Okay? He identifies the 12 loaves of bread as 12 months, the candelabras with the 7 planets or heavenly bodies, that's the planets including the sun and the moon. The 12 stones on the breastplate he claims are like the zodiac. Okay? He talks about the veils and priestly robes. The pieces of cloth represent the 4 elements, the earth, the sea, the air, the fire, the tunic representing the earth. Really interesting note, the pomegranates and the bells represent lightnings and thunders. The belt, the sea, the onyx stones, the sun and the moon, and the cap, the heavens. In other words, he's assigned cosmic significance to each part of what we would have seen at the tabernacle complex. In Jewish War, there's another really, really interesting quote he gives us here. Talking about the death of 2 of the high priests and their corpses lying in the street, he says, So those who a little earlier had upon themselves the priestly raiment and were celebrating the cosmic worship. He speaks about the high priestly clothing as somehow related to this cosmic worship, a fascinating phrase, actually, that we can explore at length on another occasion. No one's quite sure what this means, if the priests were leading the cosmos in worship, if they were representing God in the cosmos, if they represent the cosmos before the Lord. There's lots of things that can go on here. There's a similar phrase actually in the book of Hebrews that talks about Jesus as a high priest like this. 2 interrelated but separate ideas. In my work on this topic, something has dawned on me that's stated by a man named Jonathan Clowens. There are actually 2 ideas when we talk cosmic symbolism. The first is the temple as a symbol of the cosmos, and the second is the heavenly temple analogous to the sanctuary located in heaven. In other words, the earthly tabernacle and the heavenly tabernacle. I think there's a lot of sloppiness that goes on in discussions of this, mixing these 2 ideas. And Clowens agrees with me, so I'm sure he's right. But we're only going to talk about the first idea. The second idea is here too, also in Josephus and other places. But we're just talking about the first idea, the temple or the tabernacle as a model of the cosmos. Now here's the 4 questions that we want to address here. Number 1, where does he get this idea? Number 2, does this idea continue in Judaism after Josephus? Number 3, why does Josephus include this idea in his work? And number 4, what might this idea mean in terms of the history of Judaism? And what I've chosen to do today is sort of broadly go over this material so we can cover a lot of ground instead of a little bit of ground. We could do a little bit of ground too, but I think that'll be more valuable to us today. So question number 1, the possible sources for the idea of temple as cosmos that would have been available to Josephus. Most of us as Latter-day Saints are familiar with the work of Brother Nibley, who showed that ancient Near Eastern history and culture, Brother Lundquist, represents this idea as temples as cosmos. It's a very old idea, has lots of different manifestations. The second one would be the idea of